and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the fiscal year 2017 announcement of the Indian country's gross gaming revenue, or GGR. This event is being live broadcast through Adobe Connect and through conference audio. It will be recorded for video playback and transcribed. The video and press materials will be available online at our media center at nigc.gov/media after this event. Indian country's 2017 gross gaming revenue numbers will be presented to you by the Chairman of the National Indian Gaming Commission, Jonadev Osceola Chaudhary, Vice Chair Catherine Eisenclaws, and Commissioner Sequoia Simmermeyer. The Commission, as well as the NIGC Director of Finance, Yvonne Lee, will be available for questions after the announcement. Please welcome the Chairman of the NIGC, who will begin this announcement.
Thank you, Ms. Grubb. Good afternoon. Ixchi. I would like to start off by saying thank you to the tribal leaders, regulators, and members of the press who are joining us here today, both in person and virtually. My name is Jonadev Osceola Chaudhary, and I'm a proud citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation. I'm honored to serve as chairman of the National Indian Gaming Commission. Joining me today are my fellow commissioners, Vice Chair Catherine Eisenclaws and Commissioner Sequoia Simmermeyer, who will be providing additional remarks in a moment. Our annual announcement of gross gaming revenue numbers for Indian country provides a yearly snapshot of the economic health of Indian gaming. As we will discuss further in a moment, the economic health of Indian gaming remains strong. As 2018 marks the 30th year of gaming under IGRA, it is an opportune time to reflect on key policy principles that have helped create the success. Specifically, absolute adherence to tribal self-determination doctrines, preservation of the role of tribes as the primary regulators and beneficiaries of their operations, recognition and utilization of Congress's stated intent and IGRA's built-in flexibility to promote technological innovation, such as the use of electronic aids in the Class II gaming environment. Faithful application of the law that accounts for the unique histories and land bases of tribes and IGRA's built-in flexibility to allow Indian gaming to occur at a variety of different types of Indian lands. And finally, the primacy of the nation-to-nation relationship between tribes and the federal government, one that predates the U.S. Constitution. Self-determination is a fundamental pillar of federal Indian policy that informs wide-ranging legislation, including IGRA. When Congress passed IGRA 30 years ago, Congress expressly cited in its findings and purposes the long-standing goal of promoting tribal economic development, tribal self-sufficiency, and strong tribal governments. This goal is a self-determination principle, and it's the cornerstone of our agency's mission. Here at the NIGC, we support each tribe's inherent sovereign authority to serve as the primary regulator of its gaming, and we work to maintain operational excellence in all that we do while striving to be the best agency to work with in the federal government. Good afternoon. We have set out to maintain a healthy balance between the performance of our regulatory duties and support for tribal sovereignty and tribal decision-making wherever and whenever possible. In order to do this, we have included principles in our new 2018-2022 strategic plan that are carefully tailored to uphold this balance. The NIGC continues to take strides to ensure the prevention of gamesmanship on the backs of tribes. In the last year, we have increased our efforts to further develop a strong workforce, both internally and externally, and to strengthen outreach efforts to small and rural tribes throughout the nation. Additionally, the Commission has prioritized staying ahead of the progression of gaming technology, an area that changes the landscape of Indian gaming almost daily. Using our new strategic plan as a guide, we created stability in our agency and strengthened our partnership with tribes. This approach has proven to be beneficial to the Indian gaming industry and the nation at large, and it's, more importantly, supported the continuing flourishing economic development that has fueled revitalization in Indian country. The GGR provides a window into the economic health of Indian gaming and the commissioners and I are pleased to share that with you now. Revenues have once again exceeded those of the previous fiscal year. We are happy to announce that the fiscal year 2017 gross gaming revenue is $32.4 billion. The fiscal year GGR shows a 3.9% increase over the previous year, outpacing inflation and real GDP growth. Since joining the agency 5 years ago, I've seen the GGR continuously grow year over year, ranging in growth rates between 2% and 5% annually. This year, the industry has reached the highest GGR on record. The success reflected in the 2017 gross gaming revenue is due, at least in part, to tribal self-determination goals and principles, always being at the forefront of gaming-related policy. We at the NIGC are proud of the role that we have played in helping to promote these key foundational policy principles. The importance of promoting these principles is one of the critical insights learned in the 30 years of implementing IGRA, and has enhanced the continued growth of this robust industry. We trust that these insights will continue to shape dialogue among policymakers and industry stakeholders as they navigate the challenges and opportunities presented by new technologies and evolving forms of gaming. With that, I would like to ask Vice Chair Catherine Isom-Claus to give more region-specific details surrounding GGR.
Thank you, Chairman Chaudhary. Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Isom-Claus. I'm Taos Pueblo, and I'm Vice Chair of the Commission. The National Indian Gaming Commission's commitment to supporting tribal entrepreneurial spirit can be seen in our daily work. We provide this support through training, technical assistance, and enforcement only when necessary. The agency's work helps tribes to remain the sole beneficiaries of their gaming revenue, protect the integrity of tribal gaming facilities, and ensure safe and fair play for consumers, all of which support a strong industry. For administrative purposes, the National Indian Gaming Commission is divided into geographic regions to provide on-the-ground regulatory support and oversight. In fiscal year 2017, the NIGC had 7 administrative regions. Each of these 7 regions showed an increase in GGR. The Sacramento region, which includes California and Northern Nevada, showed the largest growth with a 7.3% increase from fiscal year 2016. The Portland region followed closely behind with 6.5% growth. The remainder of our fiscal year 2017 regions experienced between 1% and 4.2% from fiscal year 2016. Earlier this year, we split our largest region into 2 by making our Rapid City satellite office into a full-service region separate from our St. Paul office. As Chairman Chaudhary mentioned, one of our continuing goals is rural outreach. While there are small and rural gaming operations throughout Indian country, the creation of our 8th region has increased our capacity to serve the large number of small and rural gaming operations in that area. Although the Rapid City and St. Paul regions were not yet separate regions in fiscal year 2017, you'll see in our materials that we have retroactively generated the numbers for each region for the purpose of more precisely analyzing and responding to differing data in these regions. The modest decline seen in the new Rapid City region supports the need for a continuing focus on small and rural gaming operations as an important part of the overall tribal gaming landscape. Finally, I would like to highlight some key points from our submission data. We saw over 74% of tribal operations within a 10% year-over-year change in GGR from fiscal year 2016, indicating a stable industry. Additionally, we received 17 new operations submissions for a net gain of 10 facilities for fiscal year 2017. These numbers reflect the industry's health as a stable economic driver for Indian country. I will now turn to Commissioner Simmermeyer to speak with you further about what gross gaming revenue means and the importance of gaming revenue to tribes.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hello and good afternoon. I'm Sukhoi Simmermeyer, Commissioner for the National Indian Gaming Commission and a member of the Chaudhary tribe from North Carolina. Gross gaming revenue is the amount wagered minus winnings returned to players. The 2017 gross gaming revenue is based on 494 independently audited financial statements from 242 tribal governments. Of all tribes submitting audited financial statements, We only had 2 tribes who submitted statements in previous years and did not submit statements for 2017. With nearly all tribes submitting their reports, we can be confident in determining the overall health of the industry. It is important to remember that the gross gaming revenue is not an indicator of the profit available to tribes, but it is an overall indicator of the industry's well-being. It also reflects the positive impacts that extend beyond tribal communities and into surrounding local and state economies. As our national economy grows stronger and more prosperous, more and more communities and businesses are discovering Indian country's potential for economic success and job creation. Indian gaming creates a foundation for employment and business development. Some of the most underserved areas in the United States are seeing that tribal gaming is an opportunity for economic growth. It is also important to note that many small and rural tribes with limited economic opportunities to achieve self-sufficiency rely on gaming operations as a lifeline. Of all tribal gaming facilities, 57% earn less than $25 million in annual revenue. Revenue from Indian gaming helps to leverage tribal programs' success. Dependable tribal budgets allow tribes to provide important government services for their people, such as family support services, education and workforce training opportunities, culture and language revitalization efforts, and infrastructure development initiatives. Finally, the GGR is an important indicator for the National Indian Gaming Commission. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act mandates that the NIGC assess fees based on tribal gaming revenue in order to fund the agency's operations. While the NIGC fee payments are only a fraction of the total GGR, they are an important investment in a proven regulatory framework and require a sound and accountable strategy for their use. A consistent GGR report makes for more predictable planning as the agency strives for operational excellence by designing more transparent budget processes and measurable rationales for its fee rates. Said another way, a strong and consistent GGR from year to year is an opportunity for more efficient and effective operations at the federal level. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to the chairman for his closing comments.
Thank you, fellow commissioners. All of Indian country has worked very hard to maintain a flourishing and constantly growing gaming industry. This hard work can be seen with the $32.4 billion GGR. Our goals have been to partner with tribes and tribal regulators to strengthen Indian gaming. We're proud of this partnership and the role that the NIGC has played to help build the regulatory foundation that has helped Indian gaming become the important economic engine that it is today. There is no other economic driver that has been able to do what Indian gaming has done for Indian country. The successes of Indian gaming in the 30 years since IGRA prove that the foundational principles of federal Indian law, specifically those that support local decision-making and tribal sovereignty, are sound and should remain at the forefront of any future public policy discussions. Thank you for everyone who took the time out of your day to attend today's press conference. We welcome your questions.
We will now open up the floor to questions from our in-person audience as well as our virtual audience. In order to ensure that as many of you have the opportunity to ask questions as possible, please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up question. If time remains, we'll come back around and ask for questions again. Please raise your hand until I acknowledge you and provide your name and your affiliation for the record. As well, please include to whom your question is directed to. For those of you wishing to participate in asking questions through Adobe Connect, please provide your name and affiliation when you type your questions in the chat box. We will alternate between questions in person and those coming from our virtual room and conference line. We will now take the first question. Yes, sir.
Tony Bennett, Gambling Compliance, the chairman. The Supreme Court ruled on May 14th that sports betting can expand. It also overturned the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, which posed as a potential hazard for tribes if they wanted to pursue sports betting. What do you see in the future for gaming tribes with regard to sports betting, and are you taking any measures to prepare for the expansion of sports betting among tribes?
Well, thank you, Mr. Batt. One of the themes that we touched on in our announcement was the importance of keeping the foundational policy principles that have helped result in the success of the last 30 years in mind as policymakers and stakeholders think about Indian country's role in the future of gaming in light of shifting platforms, new technologies, and newly available markets. So whether we're talking about sports betting or whatever's next down the horizon, I want to make the point that the success of Indian gaming that flows from a respect for tribal sovereignty should be kept in mind regardless of what the emerging market is that we're discussing. Now, with regard to sports betting in particular, sports betting currently is referenced in our regulations as a Class 2 game. And that, Class 3 game, referenced in our regulations as a Class 3 game. I wasn't planning on making a major announcement at this point, but it's a Class 3 game under our regulations. And that flows from the pretty straightforward language in IGRA's classification definitions. That said, because it's Class 3, from our perspective, it will largely be based on whatever the given compacts are of a given state that sports betting may be available. Our role at this point is primarily one of technical assistance and support. We do game classifications all the time through the Office of General Counsel, and if there's a specific game or if it's a specific product that Indian country or frankly any stakeholder in the community would like us to take a look at, we'd be happy to analyze the classification of a given game. But as tribal nations, as well as everybody who is watching the sports betting story unfold, think about how sports betting will affect their communities. I want folks to be comfortable to reach out to us to review any potential management agreements that might be before us that recognize that address sports betting, to look at any potential ordinances that contemplate sports betting, or to address any other compliance issues that folks may have in mind. And so we're very tuned in on the training and technical assistance side, but many of the proposals regarding the classification, those would likely involve some changes, some legislative changes, and we always stay in our lane as regulators.
As a follow-up, then, why is the West so much further ahead than the rest of the country in these GGR?
I thought you were going to ask, Mr. Bett, why is the West so much farther away than the East from D.C., but I thought you were going to give me an easy one. But in terms of GGR, well, I wouldn't say that's the case by any means. I mean, just there are certain groupings of populations, to be sure, that have an impact on market conditions, but we see rural operations in every corner of the country, and we see large established operations in many corners of the country. And so I'm not sure I would agree with the larger generalization. Yes, sir.
Vincent Schilling, Indian Country Today. It's pretty impressive looking at the charts here that all the way across the board there's gains. And the only one that had losses was Rapid City, but even that in 2015 to 16 was almost 9%, and now it's reduced to 2.7%. So it almost seems pretty self-explanatory that there's some sort of template that you're applying across the board of what you're seeing is success and what you're seeing wasn't and now is kind of gaining. So what would you say are some of those key points that you've applied to maybe Rapid City to see such improvement? Because that's a big jump in 1 year.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Schilling. We have our Director of Finance, Ms. Yvonne Lee, here, who's available to speak to the specifics of how our regions are broke down. But let me just say a couple points. First of all, our regions are distributed for administrative purposes, so there's not necessarily, now that's why I always refrain from making broad generalizations. There's not always an immediate tie-in between GGR in a given region and how tribes in a certain part of the country are doing. our regions are broken down for administrative purposes. That said, and as we touched on in our presentation, we have been very pleased to be part of the regulatory structure of an industry that has demonstrated consistent, steady growth, stable, steady growth for a number of years. Growth that's in many cases outpaced inflation, growth that has in many cases outpaced economic recoveries in various parts of the country. And I think a lot of that can be credited to the innovation and regulation of the primary regulators of Indian gaming, tribes themselves. When we looked at creating an 8th region, as Vice Chair mentioned, we wanted to address the needs and special considerations of rural communities. As Vice Chair mentioned, there are rural communities throughout Indian country. Indian country has rural communities distributed throughout the 4 corners of the U.S. But creating an 8th region in the Plains area provided us an opportunity to provide additional resources and support and technical assistance for a part of the country that has a pretty large number of rural communities in it. So we retroactively calculated the numbers of what the GGR would look like for that region back to help demonstrate the need for us as an agency to apply whatever resources and support we could to support the smallest of small operations. And so I think that hopefully that gives a little background. Overall, there's been consistent, stable growth for a number of years. However, we as an agency recognize that what affects one community affects the entire Indian gaming community, and we want to do whatever we can to support operations that don't always have the same level of capacity as the more established operations to meet their compliance needs. So, thank you.
At this moment, do we have any questions from the virtual audience? All right, then we will return to any other questions here today. All right, well, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to come participate in the conference to learn about the fiscal year 2017 gross gaming revenue. As a final reminder, gross gaming revenue materials will be available online in our media center at nigc.gov/media. You may contact the Division of Public Affairs at 202-632-7003 if you have any further questions. Thank you all again and have a lovely day.
What's it?